You press a plastic button on your stove to make morning coffee. A tiny spark jumps, and your comfortable daily routine begins. But ancient humans did not have plastic buttons for fire. They had to find power in the raw earth around them. Imagine looking for a way to stay healthy forever. You mix charcoal and yellow sulfur in a heavy stone bowl. You add saltpeter thinking it might extend your lifespan. Suddenly, your workshop is filled with blinding smoke and heat. You did not find a secret elixir for long life. You found a recipe for something much more world-changing. If you ever wondered why our ancestors were so accidentally brilliant, welcome to Stickwise, where we dissect the beautiful chaos of being human. Subscribe now, because history is usually just a series of very lucky mistakes. How did a failed health potion become the most powerful tool in history? The answer changes how you look at every piece of technology you own. In the 9th century, Chinese chemists were not trying to build weapons. They were ancient scientists obsessed with the chemistry of longevity. They called their new discovery fire medicine, or huoyao. This is a classic human move of finding one thing while seeking another. It is exactly like finding a $20 bill in your winter coat. Except this $20 bill could level a stone wall. For 200 years, they mostly used it for bright fireworks. They used it for signaling friends across very long distances. There is a common myth that they never used it for combat. But our ancestors were far too practical to ignore an explosion. They realized this powder could do more than just look pretty. By the 10th century, they were attaching bamboo tubes to spears. They filled these tubes with the powder and bits of broken porcelain. This was the fire lance, the world's first short-range flamethrower. It was a terrifying psychological weapon used at the Siege of Dayan. Think of it as the ultimate upgrade to your basic survival gear. It was like switching from a flip phone to a modern smartphone. But these bamboo tubes had a very dangerous habit of bursting. Ancient humans needed a material that could handle the massive internal pressure. They were scientists who understood the limits of wood and grass, so they turned to the same metals they used for temple bells. By the 12th century, Song Dynasty engineers replaced bamboo with thick metal. This change allowed the gas to build up much more force. This is the moment the true firearm was finally born. It required 3 specific things to work effectively as a tool. You needed a metal barrel to contain the violent chemical reaction. You needed high-quality powder with the right chemical balance. And you needed a projectile that fits perfectly inside the hole. This creates what scientists call an occlusion to maximize the exit pressure. The oldest one we have found is the Heilongjiang hand cannon. It dates back to the year 1288. It is a bronze tube about 13 inches long and quite heavy. Imagine carrying an 8-pound bronze paperweight into a chaotic battle. This was not a weapon of precision or graceful movement. It was a portable thunderclap that changed the rules of engagement. Our ancestors used these to defend the borders of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol network acted like the internet of the ancient world. They moved ideas and technology across the vast Silk Road. This is why gunpowder did not stay in one geographic location. It traveled from the East into the Islamic world and Europe. When it reached Europe around the year 1300, things changed. Early European gunpowder was actually very unreliable and often quite weak. The ingredients would separate during long trips on bumpy wooden carts. The heavy sulfur would sink to the bottom of the storage barrels. The light charcoal would float to the top like dust. You would try to fire it and get nothing but a fizzle. This is like trying to use a battery that is constantly leaking. European chemists solved this with a clever process called corning. They mixed the wet powder into small solid granules or corns. This prevented the ingredients from separating during long travel. It also left tiny air pockets between the granules for oxygen. This made the explosion much more consistent and significantly more powerful. It is the same logic as shaking your salad dressing before use. Consistency was the key to turning a curiosity into a standard. But there was still a major problem with these early handguns. You had to hold a burning stick to a tiny touch hole. This meant you could not use both hands to aim properly. Imagine trying to take a photo while holding a lit match. Our ancestors needed a way to trigger the fire mechanically. Around the year 1400, they invented the very first matchlock. It used an S-shaped metal lever called a serpentine to help. When you pulled the lever, it lowered a burning wick down. This allowed a person to keep their eyes on the target. This was the birth of the modern trigger we use today. It is about moving from reacting to chaos to controlling it. We see this same desire for control in our modern apps. We want a predictable result every single time we click something. In 1509, they tried something even more complex. They created the wheel lock, which worked like a modern cigarette lighter. A spring-loaded steel wheel would spin against a piece of pyrite. This created a shower of sparks instantly without a burning wick. It was a beautiful piece of clockwork engineering for the elite, but it was far too expensive for the average ancient soldier. It was the luxury sports car of the 16th century world. Most people had to wait for the invention of the flintlock. The flintlock used a simple piece of stone striking steel. It was cheap, reliable, and worked well in the wind. It became the global standard for over 200 long years. But even with these triggers hitting, a target was very difficult. Early barrels were smooth on the inside like a hollow pipe. The lead ball would bounce around randomly as it left. This made the flight path of the projectile very unpredictable. Our ancestors discovered a solution hidden in the physics of spinning. They cut spiral grooves into the inside of the metal barrels. This is called rifling, and it makes the bullet spin rapidly. Think of a quarterback throwing a perfect spiral with a football. That spin keeps the ball stable against the resistance of air. Rifling turned a chaotic guessing game into a science of precision. It took centuries for this to become a standard for everyone. Loading a tight-fitting ball down a rifled barrel was very slow. You had to hammer it down with a heavy metal rod. This was not practical when things were moving very quickly around you. Everything changed again in the middle of the 19th century. We moved away from loose powder and separate lead balls entirely. Chemists invented the metallic cartridge to hold everything in one place. It combined the bullet, the powder, and the primer together. This allowed for breech loading, which means loading from the back. You no longer had to stand up to ramrod a barrel. You could stay low and stay protected while you worked. Then, in 1884, Paul Viel invented smokeless powder. Traditional black powder created a massive cloud of white smoke. After one shot, you could not see anything in front of you. It was like trying to drive through a very thick fog. Smokeless powder was 3 times more powerful and left no cloud. This was the final step into the modern ballistic era. We often think of these inventions as planned and orderly steps, but the story of the gun is a story of accidents. It is a story of people trying to cure a cold. It is a story of people trying to live forever. Ancient humans were not looking for ways to end things. They were looking for ways to master the elements around them. They took the salt of the earth and made it speak. Every time you use a tool, you are using their curiosity. Every time you solve a problem, you are using their grit. We are a species that learns by failing and trying again. We turn our burnt fingers into the foundations of new civilizations. Our ancestors did not just survive the harshness of the world. They looked at the sparks and saw a different future. They were not primitive people living in a dark era. They were the engineers of the very world you walk through. You are the continuation of 1,000 years of accidental genius. You are not a mistake. You are a grand experiment. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit the like button now. Tell us in the comments what ancient tool fascinates you most. Share this with someone who thinks history is just boring dates. Stay curious, because the past is always closer than it seems. See you in the next one for more human survival stories. Keep exploring and remember that every ending is a new beginning.